I know what you guys might be thinking. Yes, it's another Ben Simmons video, but to be honest, this situation just gets weirder and weirder, and yesterday we brought it up on the Laced Up podcast, which, yes, by the way, the Laced Up podcast is still a thing. We just got into this horrible situation where both Mike Korzemba and I took vacations at the same time and had horrible internet, and then by the time we came back, we ran into some technical issues, but we are back. We're actually upping it to possibly 2 pods a week, and we're still doing the giveaway for a PlayStation 5 or an Xbox Series X once we get to 40,000 subscribers on the Laced Up podcast channel. If you subscribe and turn on our notifications, you'll officially be entered, and I'm also running a giveaway for VC or copies of NBA 2K22 on the Laced Up podcast Twitter. Now that we get all that out of the way, cue the intro. Mic check 1 2 1 2. What's going on, everybody? So the last time we covered this Ben Simmons situation, it's getting very eerily reminiscent of what Jimmy Butler went through when he was with the Minnesota Timberwolves. You see, in Jimmy Butler's situation with the Minnesota Timberwolves, he was very disgruntled with the organization. He didn't really like his teammates. He felt like his teammates were very unmotivated, and he was going into a contract year. So he took some time off, and then one day he came into practice and he destroyed the entire Minnesota Timberwolves team, and then looked at the general manager and said, yeah, you need me. Eventually, he would get traded to the Philadelphia 76ers, ironically, and maybe that's who Ben Simmons is kind of using as inspiration for this situation. But the thing is, there's a stark contrast between what Ben Simmons went through and what Jimmy Butler went through. It mainly comes down to 2 main factors. The first one being that in Jimmy Butler's situation, he was really just pissed off and disgruntled and upset with the Minnesota Timberwolves. He didn't like how things were being run over there, and he wanted out. But he also had leverage over them because he was going into a contract year, and they already gave up a decent amount of capital to acquire him in the first place. I mean, you gave up Zach LaVine, for crying out loud, and he turned out to be the best piece in that entire trade. He's still with the team that you traded him to, the Chicago Bulls. So in Ben Simmons' situation, you have a guy that is under a max contract for a decent amount of time. I mean, if the Philadelphia 76ers wanted to keep him against his will until the 2025 offseason, they technically could. The Philadelphia 76ers could also fine him. So this is where things get a little uncomfortable, and we discussed this at length in the upcoming podcast. But where things get uncomfortable for Ben Simmons is, here's a guy that feels betrayed, right? You heard in our previous videos what Doc Rivers said about him. When he was asked whether or not he thinks Ben Simmons could be a championship caliber point guard, he said this.
Ben Simmons can still be a point guard for a championship team like the one you guys want to become?
Yeah, David, I don't know that question or the answer to that right now.
That doesn't really do a lot to inspire confidence in a guy that literally just had his worst game of his career under some fairly bright lights. Now, of course, Ben Simmons did do this to himself to a specific degree, but I also think that the Philadelphia 76ers are to blame for this. I mean, on one hand, you have a player that has stagnated throughout his entire career and hasn't developed a jump shot, but still puts out videos periodically over the summer of him making 3-pointers. But at the same time, you have an organization that really built up his value over this past season that could have easily traded him at the trade deadline, knowing full well that your general manager, Daryl Morey, well, not your general manager, your president of basketball operations, Daryl Morey, doesn't really believe in building around players that can't shoot the 3-ball. So you have a player that you could have sold at the peak of his hype, Ben Simmons, defensive player of the year candidate, but you didn't do it. You elected to keep him. And throughout the entirety of his career, instead of challenging him to get better, you decided to coddle him whenever he clearly had inadequacies in his game. Now, that's fine and all, but when time came to challenge Ben Simmons, the way it was done was so terrible. I mean, he literally had the worst game of his career. His superstar co-star Joel Embiid threw him underneath the bus, and then you have your head coach publicly pretty much giving up on you, and then you reach out to him saying, all right, Ben, so let's discuss the offseason training program today, and let's try to get in touch and try to get you a workout regimen going. Of course he's gonna ghost you, especially if he feels the way he does. As a matter of fact, Ben Simmons is so frustrated with the Philadelphia 76ers that the man rather go and play for two of the worst organizations in all of sports, Sacramento and the Cleveland Cavaliers. And if you're a Cavs fan or a Kings fan, I mean no disrespect, but I mean your front office hasn't really been known for making good decisions in years past, especially the Sacramento Kings, who took Thomas Robinson over Damian Lillard, who happened to take Marvin Bagley over Luka Doncic. Of course, they made some good moves recently, like drafting Tyrese Halliburton, but apparently Tyrese Halliburton is the reason why a Ben Simmons trade hasn't been done yet. I mean, the Kings value Tyrese Halliburton so much that they're not willing to trade him for quite possibly the best player that they could acquire in the entire NBA if you're the Sacramento Kings. There's not free agents coming to the Sacramento Kings, that's for sure. But I digress. Here's where things get really ugly. You see, Rich Paul and Ben Simmons may have been watching a lot of the NFL and said, hey, I know how we could get you out of this situation, Ben. If you say I'm not going to play for the Philadelphia 76ers no matter what, they have to trade you. But here's the issue. Nobody wants to give up the return that the Philadelphia 76ers are seeking. As a matter of fact, the Philadelphia 76ers absolutely hate every single offer they've been getting. So far, the trades that we know of is like Malcolm Brogdon, a first-round pick for Ben Simmons, which they turned down. But on top of that, I don't really know many teams that are trying to trade for this guy. I don't think there are many teams that are giving the Philadelphia 76ers what they think his value is. We talked about this in previous videos that they broached the Golden State Warriors and wanted James Wiseman, Andrew Wiggins, their 2 lottery picks this year and 2 future first-round picks, which obviously the Warriors said no, even though the Warriors had internal conversations about potentially acquiring Ben Simmons. That's way too steep of an asking price. They tried to get Kyle Lowry, OG Anunoby, Fred VanVleet, and the number 4 overall pick from the Toronto Raptors, and they said no. That's a stark contrast from what they were offered, Malcolm Brogdon and a first-round pick. So far, I think the best teams that could potentially acquire him are teams like the Minnesota Timberwolves, the Sacramento Kings, that they finally say, okay, Tyrese Halliburton's good, but Ben Simmons probably puts us a little bit higher where we need to go, even though it does cause problems with the half court because De'Aaron Fox is tremendously talented, but not necessarily the greatest floor spacing guard in my opinion. Now, here's where things get really ugly, and I guess this is the motivation that I had for making a video on this entire topic. So, according to Tom Moore, who appears to be a beat writer for the Philadelphia 76ers, or at least his @ is Tom Moore Philly, a NBA source came out and said that the Philadelphia 76ers are expecting Ben Simmons to play in the 2020 to 2021 season. The expectation is they will. It's bumpy right now, and the team expects it to get better. The 76ers don't plan on making a deal that would drop them back in the standings and not getting viable offers. More from this source is eventually he's going to show up. The Sixers will go from there. They apparently plan to fine Ben Simmons if he doesn't attend 2021 to 2022 training camp, preseason, and so on. They don't want to trade for draft picks and try to convert to players. Can't get any of the 5 to 10 NBA guys that they like either. So this is really interesting because I think this is exactly what the Philadelphia 76ers should do in this instance. What are you supposed to do? Trade Ben Simmons for Malcolm Brogdon or trade Ben Simmons for D'Angelo Russell, which of course I think either of those players would make your team a little bit better, but at the same time, you don't want to put yourself in a situation where you're giving up a number 1 overall pick for practically peanuts. I understand Ben Simmons has been memed and we've been making fun of Ben Simmons for so long, especially me of all people. I've been doing this ever since like 2 years ago, since I started my career. But at the same time, I think we need to take a step back and realize that this guy is literally just a jump shot away from greatness. And I feel like the Philadelphia 76ers haven't been able to get it out of him. I think if the Golden State Warriors show up and say, hey, we'll give you like a lottery pick that we had this year. You could take Moses Moody or Jonathan Kuminga. We'll give you Andrew Wiggins. We'll give you some future first-round picks. Let's call it a day. I think the Sixers should take that. Or if they're in a situation where they could potentially get a point guard, like, I don't know. I don't think John Wall for Ben Simmons will ever make sense. I think if the Houston Rockets want to potentially go that direction and offer future capital for Ben Simmons, but I don't think that'll ever happen. If there's some way that the Sixers could acquire John Wall without giving up a huge return, and then maybe they could move Ben Simmons somewhere else as part of a 3-way trade to a different team, I think that might make a little bit of sense. But for now, what it seems like is going to happen is Ben Simmons is going to stay a Philadelphia 76er, and this situation is going to get really ugly. I mean, he's not going to show up to camp. He's going to say, I don't want to be here when he does show up to the team. Maybe they'll get over it, maybe they won't, but Ben Simmons has already told the Sixers that it's not his job to fix his trade value. He expects a trade to just happen out of thin air. So we're gonna have to wait and see. This is a really unique situation. It's not like the James Harden situation last year, because the Houston Rockets just granted James Harden his request just based off of how thankful they were to him for what he's done for them. But this isn't like the Jimmy Butler situation either. This is very unique, and make sure you're subscribed, have my notifications on, and drop a like on this video, and check out the Laced Up podcast so you can get the latest on this entire saga. Aside from that, I'm your boy Mike. I'm dropping our mic until after Yom Kippur. Easy fast if you're fasting, guys.